And News Talk, news and views beyond the mainstream media.
Time to relax and unwind. What better way to do so than with Santa Barbara bells? For over 25 years, our wind chimes have been helping people to relax and enjoy life. Turn your home environment into a pleasurable experience. From the small overture chime to the large super bass, you will find just the right chime to enjoy. All wood, strings, and cordage are protected for long life, as all parts are rust-proof. You have 10 sizes to choose from. To see and hear more of the chimes, go to santabarbarbells.com or call us at 805-733-1513. Santa Barbara Bells is currently having a springtime sale. Come to the website and save up to 50% on all of our chimes. santabarbarbells.com.
You're listening to the Earth Needs Rebel Show, live from Dublin, Ireland, with your host, Kevin Bull. Join the rebels at freethinkingvoice.org. Apply to take the Rebel platform by emailing the rebels at the Earth Needs Rebel Show at freethinkingvoice.tv.
The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it. Though you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show. Broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM, global on the internet, and don't forget your tune-in radio feed. Live afternoon radio returns to Orion Talk Radio with Live Truth, hosted by Brian Lang. Brian brings a determined passion to broadcasting 6 days a week, Monday to Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. and Sundays 5 to 7 p.m. ET. Check your radio schedule and make room for Live Truth afternoons right here on Orion Talk Radio. Now, we're quite fortunate today. This is the introductory episode into borderline personality disorder. We're fortunate to have David M. Allen, MD, who is the author of How Dysfunctional Families Spur Mental Disorders, a balanced approach to resolve problems and reconcile relationships. We have given his bio and everything the first off, which you'll find in the chat, folks. But he is Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and the former Director of Psychiatric Residency Training at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, with a lot more beyond that. But that gives you a guide to where we're going. So we've got a gentleman on, Dr. David Allen, who can really get into this. He is very interested in the subject. He took it up from day one, and you'll find from the start of this episode, it started really with him being in his very early years, not having the experience and being confronted by 3 patients in the most traumatic way I would describe it, and being attacked. This is the unusual nature of BPD. It has a wide range of how people are affected from one pole to the other of what you might see. But we had a little chat in the over the news section between ourselves, and thought, with this being an introductory episode of this, that perhaps if Dr. Allen explained some of the basics, whether we're within BPD or not, like projection, counter-projection, transference, and perhaps we could look a little bit in empathy, just to give the basics to as many listeners as possible before we move into the family dynamics where all these are played off. Is that okay with you, Dr. Allen, if we sort of kick it away that way?
Sure, let's go.
Right. So if we were to look at the biggest thing, we do it all naturally, is when we project or we counter-project in the reaction to someone else's projection. I don't know whether you could sort of give a guide to listeners how they might see that in each other, or might see that as a standalone sort of thing.
Well, we all have mental models in our mind about how we're supposed to behave in various social situations. Cognitive therapists call those schemas. So we generally react to people sort of automatically, depending on who they are and what their function is in our lives. And we don't have to really give it a lot of thought. That we have a sort of mental map that we follow, because if we had to think about every single thing we did, we'd be paralyzed. So it's sort of subconscious. It's sort of like, driving to work every day, and when you get there, you realize you don't remember the trip because you've been thinking about something else. You're just reacting sort of subconsciously to environmental cues, and you're going on. In disturbed families, however, these mental models are also disturbed because the things that most of us would do to get our needs met are met with a lot of negativity, or invalidation, as one therapist call it, where you're basically told that either your needs don't matter or you're crazy, and that you don't even know how you're feeling. So you have to develop ways of functioning in the world to get you through, because you're dependent on your family for your life, and you're genetically programmed to respond to them, which is what we can get into later. And when you leave home, you don't lose that. The psychoanalysts used to think that people had trouble when they were like little children or toddlers, and that fixed their personality forever, and they would carry those with them. But in reality, you continue to deal with your family as important people throughout your adult life, even if you have very little contact with them. It doesn't take very, very much. And when you go out in the world, you'll look for people that kind of respond the way that they do in some contexts, because it helps you to sort of feel at home in the world and know how you're supposed to behave. So people, when they meet somebody else, start a little dance, kind of, and depending on whether the first dance move is responded to by the other person and how it's responded to and who that other person is, that will determine whether the relationship continues and how it will continue. So, like if a patient with a disorder were sort of looking for somebody to, have a romantic partnership, they'll start a little dance. And if I'll call them patients, if they respond in a certain way and the other person looks at them like they're crazy and runs for the hills, well, they know that that's not going to work. On the other hand, if they react just like their family does, that kind of triggers in them interest, and they'll keep the relationship going on that level. And not only will they be comfortable because they're sort of familiar with it, but they will actually try to induce other people to act the same way that their family does. And
that's so interesting. I'm sorry to interject there. You captured something there, if I can. I know I'm interrupting you, but you mentioned the attraction for BPD, people with BPD, to people who have little feeling, narcissists, or show little feeling. And there, I think you're capturing the fact that would be attractive. The fact there was no reaction would almost be a challenge or teaser to go further, wouldn't it?
Well, right. Remember, they're not happy being the way that they are, but they feel like they have to for reasons that I can get into later. So they act this way in spite of the fact that it's so ungratifying to them. That's why it's so puzzling to everybody else, because they don't know why they're acting that way or what even they're responding to. I mean, they have people with a disorder have a reputation for overreacting to things and seemingly in an out of proportion way. Like, to give an example, like if I had one patient, if you mentioned that her mother must have loved her, she'd go into a rage. Well, if you didn't know that the mother had, beat her with iron cords, shaved her head, and made her go to school that way, let her father force her to eat their baby brother's feces out of a diaper, and if you didn't know all that, it really wouldn't make sense why she would get so angry at that statement. I had another situation where I have a film of a 40-year-old woman and her father, and if you watch the film initially without knowing any of the background, you feel sorry for Dad. I mean, she's going on and on about how he made her do chores when she was a teenager, even when she was her night to go out to the prom, she had to cook dinner, and she wasn't even going to eat it, and you feel, oh, poor guy. Well, what neither of them is mentioning is that one of her chores when her father was between wives was to provide him with oral sex. So if you go back and watch the tape again and you listen again, you can find out that there's all kinds of references to that you would never have caught without knowing that ahead of time. So in some of the DSM criteria for different disorders, it'll say it's out of proportion to the environmental stimulus or whatever that they're reacting to, so therefore it must be disordered. But then the question becomes, well, how does the therapist or the evaluator know that it's out of proportion without knowing the entire history of the patient? Well, you can't know.
Quite so. Quite so. And this is some of the problems with DSM-5 as well, that everyone's talking about. It really does hang labels on people, doesn't it? Now, I was going to touch on to transference. And correct me, because you're the expert in this, Dr. Allen, but what might help is a simple example of that in a single factor. For instance, if a person as a child has suffered a lot of criticism or a lot of ridicule, where they were in a suppressed situation where they couldn't really express themselves for whatever reason, that they'd had to live through that, they might have developed a situation as one of the factors when they got older that they're somewhat sensitive to that. Starting off, because that feels like they're about to come under attack, for instance, or something like that. So if you put them in a scenario like we're describing, where they might then function out of proportion to everyone else, in that if someone makes a minor criticism or something very light, their reaction is the reaction to today plus everything transferring forward, the feelings and the danger about what's going to happen next. So it becomes a total overreaction to the person who has made a minor comment. Would that be a fair description of transference, or could you clarify that further?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. They're feeling invalidated. If they're constantly told how stupid they are, and the therapist were to say something that implies that they're stupid, which therapists often do, you're functioning like a 2-year-old. They don't say it that way, but that's sort of the gist of what they're saying. Well, of course they're going to react negatively, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if you tell a kid they're stupid often enough, they'll give you a reason to call them stupid. Well, they do that same way the therapist. An example, I had a patient, very attractive young woman in her 20s, and this is in Los Angeles, and she would ride her bike at 2 a.m. Through very dangerous parts of town. Whether she was dressed provocatively was almost beside the point, and she went on and on about how she should have a right to do that. Well, of course, you're feeling like, well, yeah, you should have the right, but it's still stupid. And if you were to say anything that went along with that, then, of course, they would get their back in a dandruff, and you get into a big argument, and they play stupid. Where if you said, gee, I hate to insult your intelligence by arguing with that, they kind of give you this look like, well, where the hell did that come? Nobody's ever accused me of being intelligent before. And it kind of stops them in their tracks, and they don't act stupid anymore. So it's a combination of, yes, they're being invalidated, but they're also inviting invalidation. And in fact, they're very good at it, at getting other people to invalidate them.
Is this what you call or refer to as acting out?
Yes, of course it's acting out. Yes, that's acting out is I'm not sure exactly what that means. I know it when I see it. It's hard to define, like pornography, but you know when you see it.
But it does fit with what everyone. I know you say that you might not be at the centre of everyone else in what you're saying on this, but a lot of people have these views on this side of it. But you're still reliant on the same basics of everything coming forward from the childhood in the ways we see it. If we go back to Freud, the basic defense mechanisms and everything function the same. So it's coming from somewhere. But you're actually creating a much easier to understand model, I think. Obviously, I've had the privilege of listening to you much further than we've gone at this stage. But what it builds up to is an understandable overall model in behaviour for why a person would be functioning that way, and what you can then look at it in relation to the other members of the family or other people around them without having to break it down into the basics. You've actually got a model coming forward of acting out that then makes it, I think, more understandable to accept it that way.
It serves a function. That's the key point. It's not just a random brain explosion, He was going to use another word. But it serves a purpose. There's a reason behind it. It isn't just random. Like a schizophrenic delusion has a certain random quality. Yeah, there's environmental input even to that, but it's a certain randomness in the loose associations. Like the first schizophrenic I ever saw when I was a resident thought that everybody who wore oxblood-colored shoes was a descendant of George Washington. Where did he get that, right? This isn't that at all. That's brain dysfunction, in my opinion, although there's a lot of people that think that's just a psychological disturbance, too. I think that's crazy. But this is different. This has a purpose, and they do have some control over how they act, not necessarily how they feel. Much more control than they're given credit for. And they're often much more empathic than they're given credit for because they think they're giving people what those people need. Like my lady who provoked her husband into beating her up thought he needed someone to beat up. So she sacrificed herself for that very purpose.
This is going to get
weird way of looking at it, but I think it's a very powerful way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think so as well. It does help because if you doing analysis at the time, I can see your situation, and you start with all the basics in every situation, you're going to have to build up each individual picture each time to the interactions. Whereas if you've got a good model, you can play that off against it and then look at the variations to that.
Right. You start out with as a hypothesis based on what you know about the typical family dynamics. But again, every family and every person is unique. That's what makes our field so exciting. It's not like treating pneumonia. Yeah, there's different kinds of pneumonia and people have different levels of immunity, but this goes way beyond that. I mean, when you think about how complicated the brain is with 1 trillion different connections between nerve cells that are constantly changing, by the way, in response to the environment, you just sort of know why we haven't really gotten to the bottom of a lot of these disorders. We're only in our infancy at understanding the science behind neural connectivity. You can look at what whole areas of the brain are doing, but you can't very well look at individual synaptic pathways. So yeah, it makes it very, very interesting. But it's good to have sort of a model to start out with, and then it's a hypothesis, and then you get data and either the hypothesis fits or it doesn't, or it needs to be modified according to the data that you're getting in. So it gives you a starting point. And that's why I kind of object when people say if we diagnose somebody and we're labeling them and we're no longer thinking, we're just following what we think that label is. And my answer to that is, well, you could do that. It's a really stupid way to be a therapist, but I'm not doing that. That's just a starting point for me. I don't assume anything is true until I have some evidence for it. But I have to know where to start, or I wouldn't know what to look for. Does that follow me on that one?
I do. And one other element, I put something to you as an example of how we naturally drop our empathy, and then it comes back at times around getting angry, and this happens quite naturally without it being illness as such. But of course, the extremes of illness, I'll just paint the other extreme of this, probably the example of my own when I came under attack. I'll have one of mine in. Was in a situation with a patient at the time who was diagnosed as a psychotic. Purely chemical psychotic. He wasn't constantly psychotic, as in someone that has the changes in the brain that leaves them that way. And therefore, it had a psychological background to it as well. And this gentleman was one of the gentlest characters you would ever come across. You would never believe this person, if you were talking to them outside of a psychotic phase, would be a problem at all. And of course, this is what catches people out, really. You can have a perfectly normal, safe conversation until you hit a trigger point.
Yeah, boom, yeah.
Yeah. It's like launching the fuse and the bomb goes, and it's very fast with a psychotic. In the original way we looked at it, now I'm going back some years ago to this incident, and this gentleman then exploded in a ward situation, and he picked up a paper, one of these metal paper things that you throw waste in, put it on his front foot, and then stamped all the way down the ward, went into a room where a television was, threw it out the 4th floor, and then progressed to work around attacking everyone, staff, as the usual situation. I was trying to protect an elderly lady who was very fragile, and I came subject, because he then looked at me as being against him. Obviously, he's very psychotic at this stage. He started to throw half-gallon vinegar bottles at me while I was sheltering the lady against the wall, you see. And that is the extreme you can see in a very dangerous situation. This is in a controlled environment. Obviously, we're not talking out in the street. This person was very unstable at the time. But that's the other extreme of what we can see when we lose our empathy in a situation of psychosis. And this gentleman, when he returned to normal, apologized profusely.
Well, that woman that tried to kill me when I wanted to discharge her was a good example. She felt terrible. She came up and apologized after me. What I did was I didn't know what to do with her, so I ended up transferring her to a state hospital. I mean, I was just... No. But I had lost my empathy when she said she didn't want to go home because I didn't understand. And apparently I was too stupid to ask, well, what's waiting for you there that you're so afraid of? Without laughing, of course, like I just did. So I lost my empathy, and she reacted the way she did. I haven't had anything like that happen since I learned that lesson, by the way, so I'm reasonably confident that of my safety in most instances, although I do have another horror story, which I'm not going to tell, regarding the only patient I've treated with borderline personality disorder who did suicide. But generally, you know, they do respond if you see past it. In fact, when they're going to a therapist, that's their fervent hope. They will try to provoke the therapist in any way they can initially, but they're secretly hoping they fail at that.
Yes,
they're ambivalent about it.
That's right.
Because they're coming for help. They really do want to be helped. But they seem to be rejecting everything you do to try to help them. So how do you put that together? Well, it's called ambivalence. I mean, that's what psychoanalysis was supposed to be all about, was interpsychic conflict. But when it came to borderlines, that whole concept just went out the window. They're conflicted about it. Yeah, they try to provoke it, but they really hope they fail, at least with a therapist, not with a potential lover necessarily.
Okay. We've got a little over a minute and a half to go into the next break, and then we've got the last 22-minute talk section on the other side. But the other factor that often people write about is the splitting, what is referred to as splitting. And my interpretation of what I see in that, you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that I see a person who is very black and white, and I see that there's lost a lot of the grayscale in the middle, which would give a lot of safety, shall we say. And there's a tendency when someone is in that mode where that is really there, that they are even confused themselves. They've got, like you described, they've got both senses of this, but very little middle ground to make sense of it into anything more complex.
Yeah, I'll be happy to address that on the other side. Splitting is sort of one of my pet peeves about how they're portrayed. I'll tell you why.
Well, let's pick that up the other side of the break on that. We've got about another 30 seconds before we go into the break, and we've only got a short 3 or 4 minutes on that. But because it is a feature that's often written about, it might be worth covering, I think, as part of borderline personality disorder, so people get an understanding of what people mean when they refer to splitting from your expert point of view. So let's pick that up on the other side of the break and go into that. And during the last 22 minutes, I just want to mention to listeners that this is just an introductory episode to get insight, and we will be going further with the kind help of Dr. Allen to go further into borderline personality disorder, which is going to get really interesting when you work with the family dynamics and everything around it. I assure you it's going to get really, really interesting. We'll pick this up on the other side of the break, folks, in about 2 or 3 minutes when Dr. David Allen will continue.
Free speech guaranteed. You're listening to the Orion Talk Radio Network.
At Orion Talk Radio, we're constantly working hard on your behalf. But the fight for freedom could not be fought without you. So we want to hear what you have to say at
I can't understand why anyone even bothers with the corporate mainstream media anymore. Lamestream media. They've got nothing to lie to us.
It is the bottom line informational truth that everyone needs from all points of view.
We needed a station like Orion Talk Radio.
You guys are great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for everything that Orion is doing to spread the truth. The more I listen to mainstream media, my stomach starts churning, my head starts throbbing. Deception, the agenda, the spin is just overwhelming. There is no news anymore except with Orion and the other alternative media that is doing their job.
At Orion Talk Radio, we're waiting for your call. 888-272-4434.
IRN USA Radio News, I'm Hope Duggar. The U.S. Justice Department sued Tuesday to block the merger of AMR Corporation and U.S. Airways Group Incorporated, a deal that would create the world's largest airline. In a lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, the government said the merger would hurt consumers by leading to higher fares and fees. The Justice Department said it was joined in its suit by several states, among them Arizona and Texas. Tens of thousands of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi continued to fortify their sit-ins Tuesday amid recent threats from the police that the protesters will be forced out if they refuse to go. Outside the sit-ins, police fired tear gas as clashes erupted during rallies by hundreds of supporters of Egypt's Islamist president in front of government buildings in the heart of Cairo. Security officials and witnesses say the fighting broke out when the Muslim Brotherhood, which is demanding that Morsi be reinstated, tried to break into the Interior Ministry where they said members are being held. This is IRN USA Radio News.
As many as 7.5 million Americans have psoriasis, and many of them suffer in silence, hiding their itching, flaking, and discomfort. If you're living with psoriasis, your new life begins now when you call for a risk-free trial of Ceraderm. Ceraderm provides fast topical relief of skin psoriasis. Ceraderm helps to stop the itching, irritation, redness, and flaking caused by your psoriasis. Even if you've tried everything else, even if you've suffered for years, imagine living without discomfort and embarrassment, and without wearing long clothes to hide your psoriasis. We're so confident you'll love your skin after using Ceraderm that we're offering it risk-free, but you have to call now.
Call 1-800-501-5423. That's 1-800-501-5423. Try Ceraderm risk-free. Call 1-800-501-5423. That's 1-800-501-5423.
Israel has published.
Did you know that the water you're drinking may contain over 2,000 different contaminants? From hormone-disrupting and mind-altering chemicals like fluoride in pharmaceuticals to newly emerging contaminants like radiation and other hybrid chemicals that water treatment plants don't screen out of our drinking water. PureEffectFilters.com has a breakthrough filter solution to effectively reduce the widest range of such contaminants, including the radiation coming from the Fukushima disaster. In addition, the filters will also revitalize your water by releasing natural minerals and electrolytes while increasing pH and antioxidant levels. Safeguard and revitalize your drinking water today with a breakthrough Pure Effect water filter system. Visit PureEffectFilters.com to learn more or contact us today at 1-888-891-4821. That's 1-888-891-4821 or visit PureEffectFilters.com to learn more.
DependableVoice.com, the total solution, one-stop shop for your business telecommunications needs. Nationwide business class telecommunications services, providing voice and data, voice over internet, and hosted PBX. Dependable Voice is now offering the first month free for any voice over internet and hosted PBX services. Save up to 50% on your current phone bill and save thousands of dollars with no need to purchase PBX hardware. Hosted PBX and voice over internet services include free local and long-distance calling to the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean. Email to voicemail, follow-me services, multiple visual call reports, dynamic auto attendant, advanced ACDM call queue, unified voice and fax messaging, and much, much more. Plus, get your first month free with a minimum 3-phone system. Call Dependable Voice today at 1-888-346-1085 or visit them online at dependablevoice.com. That's dependablevoice.com. Dependable Voice, the total solution for business telecommunications.
Don't miss the Medical Conspiracy hosted by me, Dr. Carpenter, every Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Orion Talk Radio.
As soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all, till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM and global on the internet. Now, make sure you check out News Stalker, weeknights Monday to Friday from 10 to midnight. Hosts Bob Green and Eric Hedrick dive into the world of corruption and conspiracy. It's News Stalker, 10 to midnight, right here on Orion Talk Radio. Now, we've got Dr. David Allen with us, and Dr. David Allen is cutting what is an introduction to borderline personality disorder. We're in the last section of the show, last 22 minutes of the talk time on the show, to go a little bit further. But don't worry, folks, because Dr. David Allen is going to be back to cut the first episode as we go into the main series on this. And as you'll have gathered, Dr. David Allen is actually a psychiatrist, a consultant psychiatrist, and teaching professor. So he's got a vast life experience in this side, and he's very fascinated with the subject matter that he's worked in all his life, a borderline personality disorder. So I'm going to pass the ball back to Dr. Allen, where we were going to go in Dr. Allen explaining what the feature of splitting is within borderline personality disorder patients. Would you like to take that away, Dr. Allen?
Okay, well, splitting, which I'll define in a minute, was one of the first things that the psychoanalysts who first started writing about this thing noticed, and that it was sort of characterized by that woman that was insulting me. Remember, the therapist that left was being idealized, and she was wonderful, and she was a goddess, and I was basically a pile of manure with no redeeming qualities of any sort. And people with borderline personality disorder often act as if they don't appreciate the fact that there's both good and bad in everybody. They don't seem to know that, seemingly. I don't think that's actually true. One of the first psychoanalysts was a guy named Otto Kernberg, and he attributed this that they hadn't negotiated a developmental stage that happened in 2-year-olds. Presumably, 2-year-olds learn how to put good and bad images of people together, but for whatever reason, due to their own innate aggression or because their parents were acting weird, they didn't negotiate this thing, and therefore they couldn't see both good and bad at the same time. Of course, I noticed that my patients, when they weren't upset, could list people's good and bad points simultaneously. They're also known as fabulous manipulators, and you'd also have to wonder, how could they manipulate people if they couldn't see all of their good and bad characteristics? They wouldn't be able to do that. So it seemed I had to agree that they often acted as if they couldn't see good and bad in the same people. But it wasn't true. And the answer I got when I brought that up to another analyst was, well, just because they could list the good and bad points of somebody, that doesn't mean that they're not splitting. And I asked myself, then how would you ever know if people had this ability if by demonstrating it you didn't believe them? So then the question is, well, why are they acting like that? And it's a complicated question because there's several things. First of all, I had a patient whose father on her 13th birthday raped her and then bought her a pony the next day. Okay, so psychologists have trouble with guys like that. That's why there's like 400 different schools of thought about psychotherapy and what causes that and what fixes it. So I guess we all split. Furthermore, when you're angry at somebody, you don't feel like talking about their good points. This is true of everybody. If you're mad at them, you're talking about what you're mad about, and you don't care if they're Mother Teresa in another life. It doesn't come into play. And if you're really feeling good about somebody, you don't tend to think about their bad points. So this is all completely normal. But other times it's just a flat-out act to get therapists to tell them they're acting like 2-year-olds. And again, I get in trouble when I say that it's an act, because people get offended. How dare you think that this is just an act? Well, if it weren't, I couldn't get people to stop doing that with just a few different phrases. And I couldn't train my residents to get the same effect if they couldn't turn it off and on, sort of like a faucet. Again, if they're in a rage, that's not the same thing. Then they can't turn it off. And again, when you're in a rage, it's very normal not to think of people's good points and to concentrate on all the bad points. So basically, they're completely normal in that response. There's a sort of a similar concept from a lady named Marsha Linehan, who's sort of the big cheese in the field these days. She has an idea that that what she calls apparent competence. In other words, a patient with the disorder seems to have very good interpersonal skills, but they really don't, because when they're upset, they don't seem to employ those skills. Well, to me, this makes absolutely no sense. It's much easier to fake incompetence than competence. How can you demonstrate through performance an ability that you don't have? I mean, you might fool somebody for a short period of time, but it wouldn't last long. However, faking incompetence, well, that's easy. There was a movie called The Killing Field about the Cambodia thing. This may seem far afield, but he just demonstrated that sometimes acting incompetent is the most competent thing you could do. When the Khmer Rouge took over, they basically killed anybody who had any schooling or intelligence. So this one guy who the movie's about played the part of an ignorant peasant, and so he didn't get killed. So that was a perfect example of how acting incompetent was the most competent thing he could do in that situation. And so this is, a lot of it's more apparent than real. In other words, it's part of their persona or their false self or the act or the way that they think they're supposed to act with their families that creates the illusion that they lack this ability. And by the way, Kernberg's theory was proven wrong by social psychologists who found that children don't learn to integrate good and bad images of people starting until they're about 11 and a half, and there's 3 separate studies that show that. But Kernberg apparently never read social psychology, so he didn't know that.
Now,
not at 2 years old.
The other features, we're in the final section, but the other features that are often seen in borderline personality patients, disorder patients, is that they appear as great manipulators when they're trying to, shall we say, either engage control of a situation. And a lot of that seems to be around what you're saying, because unless they've got a degree of control, how can they act out?
Oh, absolutely. And they've got the reputation for being good manipulators. So again, you wonder why would people think that they are cognitively impaired to the point where they don't know that people have both good and bad characteristics. Again, I always have the question, how stupid do we think these people are that they wouldn't know that? I mean, you'd have to have sort of the IQ of a turnip not to know that. But yet that never seems to occur to people to ask questions like that, which is one of the criticisms I have of the field. So people come up with these pronouncements, and there's all kinds of evidence that might bring it into question, and they just ignore it, which has been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. You're not thinking, about, what might challenge this idea that your personality is determined by the time you're 5. If that were true, then going into therapy would be a complete waste of time, because if subsequent experiences have no effect, then how would therapy have any effect?
Can I put something to you? At the early part of this, and it comes into what you just said now, you mentioned the situation where I think it was an early client with BPD. We've spent the entire time assaulting you, really, verbally, in every way, engaging, this, that, and the other. At the same time, you found out later, admiring the way you dealt with it. Now, I'm going to point out something else you said when you complimented the intelligence and then put it to a different way and put that together. One thing we have cognitive function and affective function, emotional and basically kind of more logical thinking function for listeners on this. And when we're confronted by a person that's trying to control, engage, manipulate, and do all these things on a level that's almost working all over how we're functioning and looking for our weaknesses, then if we then at that point suddenly recognize that person's cognitive intelligence and engagement, is that not what you're doing?
Absolutely, and their emotional intelligence as well.
Because the cognitive stands over the top, doesn't it?
Well, there is the fear side of it too. Again, without getting too heavily into the theory, when people don't act according to these roles they develop in their family of origin, they go through this sense of absolute terror. It's called existential groundlessness. They don't know who they are anymore. So paradoxically, this act, this false self that they project feels real to them, and they're not familiar with who they are underneath, even though at some level it has to be. And that's a dangerous sign for suicide. When people start to get better and get out of these roles, they get depressed. A fellow named Masterson, who was an analyst that I respect, called that post-individuation depression. In other words, when they started to act their real self, or we call that self-actualize, they got depressed because they didn't really know who they were anymore. And that is really disconcerting. And a lot of therapists who see that think they're getting worse rather than better, because they seem to get worse. And there's a tendency for everybody else to not trust any changes, even in the family, even though they all kind of want it. So they'll test each other to see if you really want it or not by doing what you ask them to in an obnoxious manner, which then causes you to criticize them. That's called a game without end. So you have this whole system where everybody wants change, but everybody's scared to death of it. And where that comes from, again, relates to the kin selection thing, and I don't want to get into that now because we won't really have time. Right. But there is an emotional side to this, too, and that's the fear side of not behaving in this way.
Now, I want to touch on that because I'm touching outside of BPD. It could be anywhere. Seen in psychiatry, psychology, people can suddenly change from functioning remarkably well when they either hit a trigger factor or something that takes them back, even transferring back to a childhood experiences, which sends them into a hole of these fears. And their reaction, they lose all functioning altogether. And part of that sometimes has been seen in patients where they regress back very rapidly to those behaviours. You're looking over the top of this in some ways, aren't you, in the acting out?
Well, I'm not sure I mean by over the top, but there's a method to their madness. But they do revert. Regress implies that they're really going back to functioning like a 2-year-old or whatever. And I don't really agree with that. The concept of regression and fixation; those are psychoanalytic concepts. And basically, arrested development is the lay term for that. I don't believe you can arrest your own development, short of being starved to death, or put in an orphanage and having no human contact. I think that's dependent on larger culture, not just your family, how far you grow up. But they can revert back very quickly to these forms of behavior. But I found that there are certain triggers which are way more powerful than I could ever be, and that's their parents. They could have an interaction with their parents once every several months, and it would undo months of therapy. I was no match for the parents. I used to teach assertiveness training back when that was really big, and they'd walk out feeling, I have all these skills now, and I'm going to be assertive with my mother, and then the next week they'd come back with their tail between their legs. It's like I hadn't taught them anything. And I soon realized that I was no match for the parents. And there's something called a variable intermittent reinforcement schedule, a fancy name for why people keep pulling a lever on a slot machine, even though they're losing all the time. And the reason is you never know when it's going to pay off. And if you're in a situation where your parents are reacting in a certain way only occasionally, it doesn't matter that it's only occasionally. It's very powerful. We have cells in our brain that respond just to one of them and nothing else. That's, again, so sometimes borderlines are put in hospitals and these extended, day treatment things, and they get better, and then they're followed for a few weeks, and everybody congratulates themselves because they got better. But if you follow them for another year, you find out they were pretty much back to where they started.
Right. Now, we've got
you're throwing them back into that environment.
We've got about, I'm looking at the time to give you a clue to where we are. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. I want to touch just a little bit further. We're playing a bit of tennis with you around the fear side of it, anxiety side of it. Something that we can get into, we probably recognise ourselves. It depends how we're feeling at the time and what we're thinking about. But there's sometimes a bit of confusion between anxiety feelings and excitement. They can get close together. They can change. And fear and a sort of thrill can be part of it. And I wonder if any of that's going off with the splitting with BPD patients, in that they could get quite excited about something that then becomes frightening later on.
Well, there is a sort of a silver lining that you have that kind of power to get people to act crazy when you want them to. So on that level, but it's kind of a silver lining. It's not very gratifying to have people, think you're disgusting. That's another one of these ideas that they seem to be selfishness is like 1984. Being hated is gratifying. No, it's not. Even if they brag about it, people do these awful things and they're bragging about it. I don't believe it. They know what people think of them, and I don't believe for a minute that they're happy people. But we sometimes say like people that are drug abusers. A lot of them, like after a while using cocaine, you don't even get a buzz out of it anymore. But yet they keep doing it. They're not happy people. They're not getting gratified by their drug use. Anything but. But at some level, it serves some kind of a function.
Sorry.
I just don't know if that answers your question, but
if we would looked at it from a different, I'm probing a little bit here, really, and it's your expertise I'm probing. So if we look at things like disassociation, and we could look in DID and things like that, we can clearly see it. We can have what a person functioning and emotions are very different in the different areas that they present in. Now, if we're looking in borderline personality disorder, where you've got the splitting, and you've got this black and white with a lot of the middle ground complexity missing.
Seemingly missing.
Seemingly missing. This is the point, isn't it? This is where we've got to look under the surface of what's happening here. Is that possibly, if we look at it, that you could get to a stage here, and this is where different opinions matter greatly here, that is there enough disassociation with the middle ground missing to cause functioning where the person isn't totally fully aware of their views in the other side of the split, shall we say?
Well, at the time they're acting it out, they're totally unaware of the other side. Because in order to act out, in order to do it effectively, you have to be totally in character. And it's sort of like method acting. You have to really believe you're that character. And in order to do that, you have to forget about everything else. From Hollywood originally, I think we talked about this a little bit, that method actors like Robert De Niro, in between takes, don't come out of character. They stay in character. And the reason they do that is to be a really good actor, you have to really believe you're that person that you're playing, even though at some level he knows he's Robert De Niro. Like I saw outtakes of the movie Awakenings, with him and Robin Williams, where he was playing this guy that had a neurological disorder and couldn't really respond. And in between takes, Robin Williams was trying to get him to come out of character by trying to crack him up and couldn't do it. So I'm thinking, boy, if Robin Williams can't get you to come out of character by cracking you up, I mean, what hope is there for the rest of us? Well, I think the reason we're fascinated by actors is because we all have to do some of that ourselves. So I call that the actor's paradox. You have to believe everything about your character and react like that character would, even though it's not really totally the whole picture. Yeah. So in a way, you are dissociating.
But when we disassociate, we can use methods like the defense mechanisms like denial, even intellectualization. There's so many methods. We can choose what we choose to access in our own awareness or to avoid to actually do that. And therefore, then you've left with the question, this is not going to be this introduction, the complexity of looking under that and saying how much of that is automated, how much of that is so too fast for that client to recognize.
Well, it's automated because, again, if we had to think about everything we did, we'd be paralyzed. So it's automatic. You're following the schemas, if you will. I think schema therapy has a lot in common. It's another form of therapy for borderline personality disorder that has quite a bit in common with my point of view. You have these mental models that you operate by automatically, and you don't have to think about it. Because if you did, you'd be paralyzed. You can't question should I brush my teeth today? You just go and do it. You don't think about it. So this question of whether it's conscious or unconscious or subconscious gets lost in that. Because what's automatic is different. And that's why what I do to stop my borderline patients from acting out with me is so effective, because they don't know how to respond to me. It literally stops them in their tracks, and then they have to think about what they're doing.
Yes. If we look at the comparison, one last area on this, we've only got about 3 or 4 minutes. If you look at a person that has a normal spread, no splitting, if they've got the normal complexity of everything in there, the feeling-wise in every way, and they're functioning remarkably well, to do the same things as someone with BPD when you've got the missing area or shall we say, the non-use of the area. We use it both ways around. Non-use of the area for whatever reason. We'll deal with this later on. Then we're looking at two different behaviours, and for us to do the same things, we would be horrified at ourselves at times. We really would.
I think we all do the same things to an extent, just not to that extent. I mean, it's a question of degree rather than kind.
Yes. But that's the point, isn't it? And if we look from our own perspective and then look at a person who has a developed black and white function, for whatever reason, BPD being one of them, then we're looking at a person that has a development towards that, to that point in time, of different situations that have led them to be so black and white. Then how do we quantify that? And we've only got about a minute left, which is wrong, probably to take it to the next episode on this. How do we look at that and say, well, this is just totally your responsibility all the way through, or this is something you're not realising at the time, but yes, we can chat afterwards, and you do. Do you show remorse? Do you feel guilty about this? These are all areas we can go into the next episode 1 and take you through the series and look at, really, can't we?
Well, yeah, after when you can have all kinds of emotional reactions later. It's like being in the heat of battle and then thinking about it after the battle is over. You do things you didn't even know you were capable of doing in the heat of battle. You know, that's where you hear these stories about mothers that lift cars off their kids and things. They could never do that in a million years if they didn't have the adrenaline flowing and weren't, not thinking and just reacting. So it's a very complicated question.
We can take this as we go through the series. These are the areas that we can look into, aren't we, as we expand on that. And, of course, the amazing thing of this is your family dynamic side. When we get later on in this series, folks, and we're coming right to the end of the show now, you'll find how well Dr. David Allen works and how remarkable the effects are when the family get together. This is the nice side, isn't it, Dr. Allen? We've only got a few seconds.
If you can get them to, it's not that easy.
It's challenging to say the least to get there. But listen, my friend, Dr. Allen, really appreciate you coming on and starting this as an introduction, and I'm really looking forward to, and I'm sure our listeners are, following you as the series develops on borderline personality disorder.
Well, I really enjoyed it, so thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Stay with me, Dr. Allen. I'll talk to you after the show as I take it out the other side. Thank you, listeners, for listening to Free Thinking Voice, the Earth News Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio. We'll be back tomorrow between 1 and 3 p.m. And it's the news show tomorrow, folks, so I'll be doing the whole news to catch up, which I've been doing. So that's what we've got tomorrow. Thank you for listening.
Gotta get me home to my baby's side. Ride.
Flawless Science believes you deserve the right to have a long and healthy life. You deserve to have toxin-free air and water and foods rich in minerals and nutrients. Factory farming, genetically modified foods, and thousands of environmental contaminants are polluting our world and stripping your right to healthy life away from you. FlawlessScience.com helps you regain these rights. FlawlessScience.com makes natural products and provides the best nutraceutical products to enhance your quality of life, your state of health, and well-being. So whether you're struggling with obesity, diabetes, hypertension, memory loss, allergies, high cholesterol, neuropathy, or to spice things up in the bedroom, FlawlessScience.com is here to help you. FlawlessScience.com ships quickly worldwide in discreet packaging and will never sell your information to anyone for any reason. For all your wellness, weight control, extreme muscle building, and nutraceutical needs, visit FlawlessScience.com today.
At Orion News Talk, we know times are bad. Ever since 9/11, a battle has been waging against we the people. Our Constitution is under attack. A clandestine war has been launched.